Welcome to Remnant Stories. My guest today is Jeff Richardson.
I'm Jeff Richardson. My wife and I and our kids live here in Utah, but my story begins in Ohio. We're both born and raised in Ohio. My mom's family's in the greater Columbus area, and my dad's parents, when they moved up from Kentucky, settled in a small town in southwest Ohio. And it was such a small town, it's actually called a village. It's the village of Blanchester.
A village.
It's still what it's called, man. So I say that because I'm going to come back to that. But anyway, in Columbus, my grandparents on my mom's side were the first converts to the church in the 70s.
Really?
Yeah. So they were going to take this big cross-country trip out west. And someone made the recommendation that they ought to stop in Salt Lake City and check out Temple Square. I don't know if that person was a member of the church or not, but they did that. They stopped, and my grandpa has a story about that, but he had a good experience and wrote down his name and info on a card. And after the trip, when they got back, the missionaries contacted him from that, and they ended up getting baptized. And as a baptismal gift, the missionaries gave them a copy of A Marvelous Work and a Wonder by LeGrand Richards.
Great book.
Great book. If you haven't read it, it's good. It goes through all the topics of the restoration, but it's not just like, here's a verse why we believe this doctrine. It kind of gets in depth a little bit, which is, anyway, I still have that copy in my possession, so
Excellent.
happy to have that. But anyway, my parents weren't together very long. They separated when I don't even think I was a year old. I think I was still a baby. My dad's not LDS at all. My mom is, as a result of her parents' conversion. So the way the custody arrangement worked out for them was I'd be 1 week with my mom and 1 week with my dad. And so I was growing up LDS on my mom's side, and my dad is Lutheran. And so at the same time, I was growing up in his faith.
He's active in the Lutheran Church.
Yeah, I don't think we were ever super active in either faith. We weren't like every Sunday going families, but on both sides we went pretty often. So my mom's side, I was given a baby blessing by my grandpa, baptized at 8, and got into the Aaronic priesthood, deacon, and a priest. And at the same time, I'm baptized as an infant on my dad's side in the Lutheran faith. And the next thing was confirmation and catechism, and that's 8th grade, so like 12 or 13.
In the Lutheran Church.
In the Lutheran Church, yeah. So 8th grade, 9th grade, I've kind of grown up in those two faiths. That was never a weird thing for me. Like, it wasn't like, one versus the other. I think my parents were pretty good at just taking me, having their own influence, and seeing how that shook out. So, but I always loved going to church. I always had a good feeling. My mom's LDS faith and my dad's Lutheran church. Always had a good experience, both places. But around end of middle school, going into high school, I kind of became a troublemaker. Troublemaker. I'm going to tell on myself a couple times, but there's a reason behind it. So going into high school, kind of being a troublemaker, and when I say that, I mean like I was very people pleasing with my friends. So I had the wrong friends in school around that age. It's kind of like smoking and dipping and drinking with my buddies. Ninth grade, man. Yeah. So, in Ohio, when you don't have nothing better to do, you get bored and you get in a little bit of trouble. So I'm glad my kids are out here in Utah now. But also at the same time, when I was with my dad, I had my own Bible in my room. I don't know what version it was. It wasn't a King James. It wasn't NIV. It was something else. But I would read that when I was at my dad's. So about that age. And I remember finishing the Gospel of Matthew. And I felt pretty proud of myself to read that all the way through on my own. It wasn't a church thing. I kind of liked it. And I also read other parts of the New Testament. But to combine my boredom, my troublemaking with my newfound interest in the Bible, when I was at my dad's and he would go to sleep, I would sneak outside on the front porch, take my Bible. It's like midnight, 1 o'clock. I'd be reading it and smoking like a cigarette at the same time. So
That's quite an image.
I'm in my own world, man. You know, like kids, they're just kind of doing their own thing, and yeah. So it's kind of funny looking back on what I thought was cool. And
how would you feel if Abe was doing that, your son?
I would probably feel like how my dad found out, or how he felt when he found out. Which, yeah. So anyway. Because I was also a troublemaker in the school I was going to, my dad decided to put me in a Catholic high school in Columbus, Ohio.
Lutheran to Catholic.
Mormon, Lutheran, now I'm in a Catholic school. He wanted me to go to a private school, which was a different environment from what I was used to. And that's kind of, I actually had a theology class there. We had mass regularly, and so I was kind of getting the melting pot experience for Christianity.
Really?
Yeah. So
taught by priests and nuns.
We had a nun at our school. She didn't wear like the religious garb, you know, that you imagine a nun wearing, but she had like regular.
Okay.
Clothes, but yeah, she was definitely a nun. She always told me growing up that when she was in school, they would bust your knuckles with a ruler, and she was always saying that to tell us, like, you know, that's still an option, but
they did. My mom went to Catholic high school, and they did use corporal punishment.
Yeah, we had uniforms. Your hair couldn't touch your ears or collars. We had Saturday detentions and fines and.
Catechism on Saturday too, or was that integrated into
in the Catholic faith?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I took like a theology 1 and 2.
Oh, so it was like a class.
It was a class.
Okay.
Yeah. So, different environment, different kind of kids. That was kind of more the uppity, parents had money kind of a school. It was a sacrifice for my dad to pay for me to go there.
Sure. Private school.
Yeah, I kind of was growing up on the west side of Columbus, and it was the opposite. And so, different environment. So, it was a change, but I still kind of had that teenager mentality of doing stuff with my friends when my parents weren't around, and I'll let you fill in the blanks on the troublemaking stuff. But it came to a point where my grades weren't doing too good. And so, my dad, he didn't use this language that I'm using, but he basically said, I'm not going to pay for you to go to a private school and then you to have failing grades. And I think any reasonable parent would, probably say the same thing.
Probably.
So the end of my sophomore year at that Catholic school, my dad gave me the option. He said, if you want a fresh start, why don't you go to finish up school in the town that I grew up in? So I didn't have lots of ties there other than my family. Like, I was into doing new things, fun things, and so I accepted that. And that was another environment, because that's very country and not city, which is what I was growing up in. If you wanted corn or beans, man, you had it there. Real small town and good people, but when I moved down there, I didn't have church anymore. Like, I moved down there with some relatives, and so I was kind of doing my own thing. Still kind of being a troublemaker, but
More boring, I think, probably.
more boring. I'm telling you, man, when you're bored, you find things to do. And when you're a teenager without parents, that's a bad combo. But anyway, it's a really good thing that I ended up moving there, because my senior year, there was this girl that I kind of liked, and she kind of liked me, and she invited me to her church, which was a non-denominational church. So just getting everything at the table when it comes to Christianity. So because I kind of liked her, I went to her church, and
Why not?
we ended up not working out. But I loved that church. I really did. I had a good experience there. There was, in my life, probably for the first time, good men that I could look up to. They were fun, they were clean, and they were real about their Christian faith. It wasn't just a Sunday thing, which I'm not saying everyone I knew prior to that, they were just Sunday going people. I'm just saying it was an everyday thing for these guys, and it was a turning point for me to be around those good men. And so I got into that church. Man, I was immersed in it. I started going first and second services on Sunday.
Really?
Wednesday service. Monday they had an outreach at this place called Father's Kitchen. I was in the youth and some other outreaches in Kentucky over the border there. And I was in it, man. Like at least 4 or 5 days a week I was in it. It was a real game changer for me.
Immersive.
Yeah, and I also started getting into the Bible more, because that's their thing is the Bible. They're living their faith the way they understand it. And yeah, man, I was reading the Bible a lot. My senior year in high school, I enlisted in the military. So I was in the Ohio Army National Guard.
Were you 18?
So I was 17 when I enlisted. I didn't go to basic until I graduated high school.
Okay.
Couldn't do that. Well, there was an option. It was called a split train, where you could go to basic, your summer year between like junior and senior year. But then you had to stay home, and then when you graduated, you can go off to more training. I didn't do that option. But I enlisted when I was 17. And a fun fact for you, when the Saints were in Ohio and Kirtland, Joseph and his brother Samuel were told that they needed to join the Ohio militia. And there was 3 types of people that could get out of that. A clergyman, a mailman, and I forget the last one. You have to look it up. But so Joseph, being the position he was, he got off of it. He didn't have to go. I think Samuel was a 70 or something like that. So he was a clergyman, but they said, no, you have to go. And so he didn't go, and they fined him. And Joseph, if you read his journal that day, he had some pretty upset language. He said that they would have to, in a way, they're gonna be held accountable for fining his brother. And so me and Joseph almost shared that in common. The Ohio Militia was the precursor to the Ohio Army National Guard. Anyway, moving on. So I'm really into church, really into my faith. I graduate high school and I go to basic training. I go to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and I took my faith with me there. I had a friend at the time who's now passed on, but he told me, he said, when you leave home, you gotta take your faith with you, man, because people sometimes they leave home and they leave their faith at home too. So he said you gotta take that with you, and I did. So in basic training on Sundays, you could go to church, whatever your faith was. So I went to non-denominational service, and it was in a big auditorium. there was definitely a couple hundred people every Sunday that went to it, and I was into it. That guy was preaching his message, and I'm focused in on it. And my first service, I learned by looking around that everyone else was asleep. So I learned that when people went to church, if you were a believer, you went to church because you believed. If you were a non-believer, you went to church because you got to sleep. So there's 3 times in basic you could go to sleep. The first was when they told you to go to sleep at night. The second was at church, I found out. And in the military, you have to have your bed tight. Like, you have to have it tight, or drill sergeants will come in and flip it and mess up all your stuff. So one thing to do, you'd make it tight, is underneath the bed frame of your mattress, you pull the corners of the comforter and your sheets to really iron out the wrinkles. So if you had the bottom bunk, you could go on the floor underneath your bunk, act like you were pulling the blankets tight, and then just go to sleep. So anyway, at church was one of the times people would fall asleep. So anyway, graduate basic. I go to Mississippi, Missouri for some other training. And I come home and I get right back into church. Back to all the services. Now, because I was graduate of high school, I kind of became an assistant to the assistant youth pastor. And I actually even contemplated becoming a pastor myself. I had no idea at the time what that would have required me. I just knew I had the interest to preach and to teach, and so that's kind of where I was going. But because I was into my faith so much at this time, the thing that was really pressing on my mind from when I was reading the New Testament was baptism of fire. That was kind of the thing that was really sticking out to me. And of course, all you have in the New Testament is Acts. The day of Pentecost, you have Peter preaching to the Gentiles and their experience. And so the New Testament had limited teaching on that if you're just reading that by itself, but that was catching my eye. And so I'm reading everything I can on it. Scriptures, internet, I'm crowdsourcing and talking to other people. Hey, have you had this experience, or do you know people? And so anyway, I'm 19, and after a year or so of being home and studying that, I had a good experience with that. And that spiritual experience was, one, extremely meaningful for me because of the internal change that came of that. But I also had the intelligence from that experience that if I could experience that, I just firmly had this conviction that everything else in the scriptures could be experienced too. Everything. And that becomes something that I lean on later on as I venture back into Mormonism. But at the time, I just knew that. In fact, I started saying the scriptures are best understood when experienced. Because, hey, I get that now, man. I can relate to that. The other thing that happened from that experience is the scriptures really began to open up to me. I had lots of questions. I remember driving through our small town, and there's an intersection where on each corner, all 4 corners of that intersection, there's 4 different churches. It's just awkward, and all the doors are kind of facing each other. So everyone's walking out at 10:30, and I'm sure they had good relationships, but it's just all different faiths. So I'm driving through town. I'm like, why are there so many different churches? Driving through the next day, I'm like, well, if there are different churches, do they have different authority, or where are people getting their authority from? And those all sound like, LDS questions now, but at the time those questions were coming to me. And so I'm driving up in the street often, and all these things are coming to me, and those are good questions. So anyway, I meet this girl who's now my wife, and I'm in this small town. She's up in Columbus, and we're talking, and I drive up to Columbus to meet her. We had planned to meet and go on a date, and I called her. I'm like, hey, I'm like 10, 15 minutes out. She's like, oh, I forgot you were coming. I'm at the pool with some friends. So the first time we were supposed to meet, she blew me off. I ended up getting a job in Columbus, and so now I'm back in Columbus. We can kind of get our dating more serious, and we ended up, becoming a couple. But I move in with my mom in Columbus before I get my own place. So I'm taking my new love for my faith. I have this spiritual experience. I feel confident in what I know. And so my objective when I move in with my mom, the best way I can show gratitude to her is to convert her out of Mormonism. So I really want her to come out of that. Like I'm evangelical now, man. I got some good news to share with you, Mom. And so I'm kind of grilling her. Looking back, I shouldn't grill my mom like that, but I was zealous. They had an Ensign magazine in our house, which everyone in Ohio calls it Ensign. I was corrected when I moved out here. It's Ensign. So she had a conference edition Ensign from the last conference, and I'm reading that thing, and I'm highlighting everything that's wrong. Like, wrong. I'm zealous, and I'm showing it to my mom. I'm like, Mom, the Bible says this. How can you believe this? Anyway, I end up going to some training over the summer. The next thing I read after the Ensign is the church has the teaching of the presidents of the church series. I read the Joseph Smith one because that's where it's, that's the origins as far as I knew. And I'm away for training, and I'm reading Joseph Smith stuff, and that's a different read from the Ensign.
Yeah.
Because it's one thing to quote scriptures, and this is why we believe this, because the scriptures say this. He's opening things up. He's expounding doctrine. When I'm reading this, I don't believe he's a prophet, but no one else I knew or studied could do that. He's acting as if he's seen the Lord. He's seen into heaven. He's seen into hell. He's expounding what faith is. Man, all that stuff. And I ended up learning that Joseph he said something like, people talk of heaven and hell all day, but I've seen neither. And that's what I was thinking at the time. So I'm reading the manual still, and I end up having this feeling of, oh crap, I kind of like this. And my stomach just drops, man. I'm away for training. I'm supposed to be reading this stuff to convert my mom out of Mormonism, and I'm reading Joseph, and I like his stuff. So I come home from training.
You're failing in your mission.
Dude, man, yeah. This is not good. But I come home, and now I'm not as aggressive. I'm a little more sensitive towards my mom and her beliefs. But I'm kind of a closeted Christian who now kind of sort of likes Joseph. And so I start reading some other stuff. I'm talking to my mom's family. My sister was pivotal. She was answering a lot of questions I had. I'm not telling them that I like it. I just want to know more. And I'm out in my mom's backyard doing some yard work for her, and I'm really mumbling to God about this stuff, man. I walk around out front, and man, there are two missionaries right there in their car. And I'm like, dude, that's the missionaries. You know, white shirt, name tag, they stick out, especially in Ohio. And so I walk up to them and I knock on their window. I'm like, hello, it's me. And I asked them, I said, hey, when are you guys going to come teach me? And you should have seen their face, man. They're like, yeah, that never happens. They're like trying to get people to listen to them. And here I am saying, when are you going to teach me? So we set a date for them to come back to my mom's. And we meet. We're kind of small chatting. I'm telling them about my girlfriend. And they're like, Lindsay Saygraves? I'm like, yeah. She's like, oh, we just met her before coming over here on the other side of town. So in my mind, I'm like, all right, man, you know, things are in a weird way starting to kind of come together. I'm meeting you. You just met my girlfriend the same day, and I'm not talking to my girlfriend about, you know, my feelings. I'm like, that's kind of cool. You know, I don't know how Lindsay felt about it. She might have felt kind of indifferent, but I thought that was cool. So I'm listening to the missionaries, and to be honest, I'm not super interested. I'm not drawn into what they're saying. I think they're doing a great job. But I was interested in Joseph enough to listen to them and respect, you know, what they're trying to teach. And anyway, I suckered Lindsay into having discussions with them too. And then I read the Book of Mormon for the first time all the way through, and I liked it. I liked it because there was things in there I already believed from my Christian faith. The Book of Mormon is just kind of opening that up a little bit for me. So I think I kind of get sold on maybe I need to come back into Mormonism. My pastor from my old church catches wind of that. And I had respect for that man. It wasn't an authority thing. It was, he's a good man. He kind of took me in when I was going there on my own. He's very cool, fun, personable, was very active in his ministering, and he was a good guy. And so when he caught wind, he called me. He was like, hey, Jeff, you know, I'm hearing that you're kind of talking about, he said John Smith at the time, but he meant Joseph Smith. And I was like, yeah, I am. And he said, I just want to tell you. He said, Jeff, I'm not worried about you 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 50 years from now. I want you to have a good, long life. I'm worried about you 100 years from now when you're dead and you can't come back and change your mistakes. And so in a loving but firm way, he warns me about going down this path that I'm now starting to go into. And boy, that hit me. Like, that's still a good statement. I would say that to anybody. It made an impression upon me, but because I felt so drawn to what I was getting into now, I couldn't let it go. I couldn't just step away, even with my pastor's warning. So we got off the phone, and I kind of did one of those, you know, shaking my fist at God thing. I was like, dude, you better be right about this, because I felt drawn to Mormonism again, despite my Christian zealousness and zealotry, and I was in. I felt like this was God. So despite his warning, I take it to heart, but I keep moving forward with this. And that's kind of where the real transition started happening. Once I could confront my my pastor about where I'm going and still move forward, that's when the transition into Mormonism really kicked in. And that was hard for me to leave that church because they turned my life around. I credit them and those men in that environment for turning my life around as a youth. And I had friends there that I would consider family. None of my other family was going with me to that church. That was me. So they took me in. And so when I left that church, it was transitioning away from it. That was hard. That's probably equivalent to members in the church who leave for one reason or another. I would equate it to that kind of difficulty.
It was a real sacrifice. Leaving people who cared about you and it helped you get on a good path.
But I knew if I would not have kept going forward, I would have missed out on something. I knew that. I had that conviction. So I'm in. I didn't need to be, put back on the church records. I already was still from my infancy. I even asked if I could be rebaptized. The bishop, he was trying to tell me without telling me that that's kind of not what we do here. But he did say, we'd have to take your names off the church records and rebaptize you. But look, man, just reactivate your faith. And I was like, all right, fine. But my wife needed to be baptized. So there came a point in the missionary discussions where she was hesitant to join. She wasn't vocal about it, but you could just tell. And the missionaries were like, look, we've been meeting with you for 6 months. You believe everything we're saying. What's stopping you from getting baptized? And I think that was kind of my girlfriend at the time. That was her, I don't know. I guess there is nothing stopping me. And so we set a date to get baptized in December of that year. We're 21 at this point. Well, Lindsay and I had also been dating long enough, 20 to 21 years old, where we were taking marriage more seriously. Which to me, that's still young, but I regret nothing. But I'm just saying, we're thinking about marriage. And before she get baptized, we're talking about it. And we said, what the heck? Why don't we just go get eloped? And so we did. We got eloped. We had like a few, friends. Didn't even tell our family. So we're 21. It's December of that year, and we get married.
Okay.
Yeah. So
a little cowboy there.
Yeah, we're passionate, man. Like, let's just go do this. Why? We don't have the money. Let's go get married. A couple of weeks later, we told our family. So we'd already been married a couple of weeks.
Couple weeks?
Yeah.
You're living together now?
Yeah. We weren't even living together. We were in separate arrangements. We told our moms first. Both our moms cried, but for two different reasons. My mom cried because she was happy. Her mom cried because I was Mormon. She thought I was going to take her daughter out to Utah, do the polygamy thing. Well, joke's on her. I did take her daughter to Utah, but I'm not a polygamist. So anyway, when we got married, it was the day before she was to be baptized. So the day of her baptism, we told our bishop, we said, hey, by the way, because I was going to baptize her. I was a priest still, and I said, hey, when I baptize her, I'm not using this name. Now she's Lindsay Richardson. And he's like, oh, you guys got married? And we're like, yeah, we eloped. And he's like, oh, cool, me and my wife eloped too. So, and we had this connection, and it was great. So I baptized her. And now we're in it. Now we're married, we're in the church. We end up telling more people about our marriage. And oh, by the way, your daughter or your niece or your granddaughter is also LDS. And that was kind of like They took it in good strides. Her grandpa was kind of the one that was grilling me the most, I think. He's a very active Methodist, and I don't know if he ever expressed disapproval, but he wanted me to know his concerns for his granddaughter. Anyway, so when I come back to the faith, the LDS faith, I needed to know what I was talking about, because I had people from my old church questioning me. In Ohio, and you can Google this, the LDS population is 0.01%. So when people find out you're Mormon, they have questions too. Or statements, right? Like the big one was always, how many wives do you have? Mm-hmm. I would say one, because that's too many mother-in-laws. So anyway, so I needed to know what I was talking about. And I also felt as a way to honor my Christian faith. It wouldn't be nice for me to go from this active Bible Christian believing guy to just going through the motions LDS guy now. I wanted to carry the same passion and love for God that I had there to my new faith. So I immerse myself now in the LDS faith. And people kind of saw that I somewhat knew what I was talking about with the Bible. So I kind of, and I feel like a lot of people are this way, but I kind of became like the go-to guy for questions on the Bible. And I'm only 21, 22, but so the missionaries always took me out. I became the gospel principles teacher, ended up being a ward mission leader, because in Ohio and other places outside of Utah, like Bible's the one, you convert with the Book of Mormon, but the Bible's the one you really need to know. So I become active very quickly. I had a guy in my ward who I consider now like a godsend. So I'm really wanting to be immersed in Mormonism. And when I say that, I mean doctrine. I need to be able to answer questions. This guy would push me. We had late night discussions on what I considered then the deep, meaty Mormon doctrine. And what that was Brigham Young, Heber C. Kimball, Bruce R., LeGrand Richards, those guys. Like I'm 22, he's a few years older than me, and we're pushing each other in what Mormonism is. And I'm active, he's active. We love the temple. Oh, my wife and I ended up getting sealed going through the sealing ordinance in Columbus a year later. And it's a small temple. One lady, instead of calling it the Lord's house, she called it the Lord's cottage. It's a one floor, one room for each thing, and that's it. Anyway, so we're temple going, we're really immersing in the Mormon stuff. And then he introduces me to Visions of Glory by John Pontius. And by this point, we had already been talking the second comforter, calling election made sure, angels, spirit world. Like, this is good stuff. I love it. We're chatting about it regularly. So Visions of Glory was a good fit for me. And if you read Visions of Glory, it's not Pontius's account. It's another guy's account. Page 1 through 99 is all these experiences he's having. Page 100 to the end, everyone dies. It's end times, last days, visions. I made the mistake of going home and telling Lindsay about page 100 to the end. So I did that one wrong. I should have give her a warm up with all the good stuff. So that really freaked her out. I think she really, I'm still paying the price for that one. She didn't like learning.
Here are the last days.
Yeah, man. I mean, this isn't like old Baptist brimstone and fire. This is, people are really seeing what the last days is like. Okay, so now I'm into the the second comforter, calling election, angels, spirit world, visions, dreams, because of my own studies, because of Pontius. So now I'm 23. I'm Googling the topic of the second comforter. And that's when I stumbled into Denver's book, The Second Comforter Conversing with the Lord Through the Veil.
What year is this?
2014,
Okay.
somewhere around there. And I'm like, dude, a whole book on this? Sign me up. Or buy that on Amazon. So I'm looking at the reviews. Most of them are extraordinarily positive from 2006 to that point. Except there were a few that caught my eye that said, hey, this guy's excommunicated. And for me, I loved those doctrines, those topics. But if the end result of me studying this guy was he left the church, like that was his fruits, I'm out. So I had the thought that I don't care what he has to say. That's not for me. He's not a member of the church. I don't want to go down that road. But as soon as I had that thought, another thought came to me that Oliver Cowdery was excommunicated. Orson Pratt was excommunicated. Other guys were excommunicated that were church leaders, and the church still sources them in their publications. Of course, they came back to the faith. So my thought was, well, if Denver's excommunicated, so were these guys. The church still quotes them, so maybe there's something in here that despite his excommunication, I can find something good and add that to my faith. That was the thought that came to me. So reluctantly, but with some hope, I bought it and I read it, and it was okay. I thought it was okay. I didn't see the book for what it was. I was looking for the nuggets and not, what is this book telling me? But I liked it enough to read his other books. Nephi's Isaiah, 18 verses, Come Let Us Adore Him. And dude, I'm reading those books within like a day or two because they're good. Like I'm sensing something about what I'm reading similar to what I was sensing when I read Teachings of the Presidents of the Church, Joseph Smith. I was having those oh crap moments. There's something to this. Not Denver, but just the way it was being opened up.
The light.
The light. There it is. I knew he was excommunicated for passing the heavenly gift. So I still was thinking, if there's something that can be had in these books, I'll read it. I'm not going to read Passing the Heavenly Gift. Well, I read all his books except for Passing the Heavenly Gift. That's all that was left. And if it was the only book that was left, why not? So I read it. And I was reading these other books quickly. That one I did not read quickly. That was a tough read. Not because anything in it I felt was, at the time, incorrect. I didn't want to know those things about Brigham because I didn't ask to know. I didn't want to read those things about Heber J. Grant because to me those guys were prophets, church presidents. Look at the church now. Like, they have good fruits. Denver's excommunicated. He doesn't. So now I start to see why this was a book that got him ultimately excommunicated. But he wasn't saying anything that was wrong. He was quoting Brigham Young, Heber J., these other guys, their journals, their talks. And so it may have skewed the way I saw them, but it was raw and authentic. So I learned that Brigham Young said he didn't consider himself a prophet. I learned Brigham Young said he had never seen the Lord. That was counter to what I was believing, because the stuff that I was reading, the Second Comforter, calling election, like that's the stuff that's supposed to be happening. I read those things, but I didn't feel ill-willed toward the church. Things just kind of changed. It took the varnish off, as some people would say. But I'm still active. I'm still going to church. The thing that changed for Denver for me was in the passing the heavenly gift. I don't remember the exact wording. I'd have to look it up. Something to the effect, he's speaking to the people who have left, I think, or people who were not comfortable with these truths about the church. And he says, look, if the church isn't what you thought it was, what's stopping you from still moving forward in your belief and faith in the restoration? And that was my aha moment, I think. I kind of stood up and it all came together. He's teaching truth, light from his books. He's not encouraging anyone to leave the church. He's being real, and he wants people who are disaffected to hang in there with the restoration. And then it just hit me. I thought there's no way that he can explain this with such clarity if he's not having some kind of communication with heaven. That was my thought. Take it for what you want. So it wasn't Denver, it was the light that I was tasting. Just like Joseph. Joseph's the one that converted me, looking back. It wasn't the missionaries, it wasn't my family. It was the light and truth from Joseph. I'm having that same feeling now. When I had that thought about Denver, that began another transition. This is round 2. So I go home and tell my wife about Denver, my thoughts about him. Nothing about my thoughts about the church. I just want to talk about Denver. I still being kind of the zealous dude that I'm prone to be. I went down, told her what I thought about Denver. I think he's legit. This is what I think of him. And that didn't go as well as I thought it would. Lindsay wasn't mad. She was just like, dude, I just joined the church. What are you talking about? At least that was my interpretation. She's like, you just had me join the church. I joined, and now you're talking about this other dude. Like, I can't keep up, man. And don't forget it. I upset her when I told her about that stuff in Visions of Glory. So this is now round 2 for her, man. Anyway, once I told my wife how I felt about the things that Denver was saying, I felt good about pursuing other things. When I read Passing the Heavenly Gift, when I finished it, that was just a few weeks before he gave the 10th talk. So, because I thought the things that he was sharing was legit, I was much more open to the 10th talk. Excuse me. And I read it. I remember being on LDS Freedom Forum. Were you on that?
And I dropped in, but I wasn't aware of it.
And there's people that are updating the thread from Denver's 10th talk because they were there and it was alive, real time. And I was like, what? But I was open to it because I had already had these feelings about him similar to Joseph, and maybe there's something there. So anyway, I'm still active in the church after the 10th talk. But things started changing in church for me, whether I wanted it to or not, because I now know these things from Joseph, Bruce R., Denver, LeGrand Richards about the good stuff of Mormonism, and I'm talking to my ward friends, and they don't have that same enthusiasm. I either got, that was for them at that time, but not for us now, or like a head nod, like, oh, that's cool, and then on to the next subject. So my church experience from then on was not bad. I never had a bad church experience, church leader. Things were just different now. I kind of went from the guy who had the answers for them to just kind of being quiet because I couldn't resonate any longer. Nothing about them, that's just me.
Are you saying that no one else is picking up on these things that are important to you, and they don't have the background that's resonating with you? They don't have the passion about the second comforter, conversing with the Lord through the veil, this bigger picture.
Yeah.
And so these are like, okay, no big deal.
I'm in a new ward now. That guy that I told you I was staying up late with, we're not in the same ward anymore. He's off doing school stuff, graduating and pursuing career stuff. I'm in a new ward. I just didn't have the same satisfaction anymore. Because what I wanted to talk about, they didn't. And what they wanted to talk about, I obliged, but wasn't interested as much. And so I was just kind of quiet and
not satisfied.
I love the restoration. I love Joseph. I love Mormonism. But I kind of quit going to church. Not everybody does that. Some people are, happy to stay in church, and I love that for them. I love that about them. That's a noble thing. For me, we had the missionaries over a lot. We were the house closest to their apartment, so they'd end the day at our house, and we give them pizza and just let them kind of cool down for a little bit. And of course, we talk gospel stuff. But when I kind of quit going to church, that's kind of when people were like, "What's up with Jeff? Why is he like? That's our guy. Like, what's wrong? That's our ward missionary." And things were just different. So a couple years go by, I think a year or two, and Lindsay and I would stop into church every now and then. I didn't feel like I was wanting to do something else. I was happy with the church. I just wasn't church going anymore. Later on, I'm in Arizona for some training, just a couple miles north of the Mexican border. There's a post there, and I wanted to be baptized. Denver talks about that in the 10th talk. That's weighing on me. That's kind of where I'm finding satisfaction now, is with what's going on with that. And I decided to be baptized.
Did Lindsay know about this?
Yes.
Oh.
I talked to Lindsay about it. Yep. She wasn't. She was actually baptized just before we moved out to Utah.
Okay.
So still kind of recent, but she was just. I learned the hard way by sad experience, and I'm lucky to have Lindsay, I'm telling you, because I wanted her to be on the same page that I was. And I was telling you before this interview, I read a quote at this restaurant that said, "Men are like fine wine. We start out as grapes, and then women just beat us down into something more delightful." And it took me a while to learn that about Lindsay. I can't force her. I can't coerce her. And So I got lucky, and we're on the same page now. But I'm baptized. She's not. We're kind of doing our own thing. I'm
What
on.
year is this?
Between 2015 and 18. We're at home doing our own thing, but I'm online a lot with fellowships elsewhere because there's nothing in Ohio. There was one or two people, but they're far away and we don't talk much. There was one guy just before I ended up moving out to Utah. He reaches out to me on the fellowship locator, and he says, "Hey man, can we meet? Like, I want to talk about this." And I find out that he's been in this for a few years. And he's just around the corner from me.
Oh.
I'm like, "Dude, where have you been?" He's like, "I didn't talk about this stuff." And now I'm getting ready to move to Utah, and we could have been meeting. And just the way it worked out. I'm full time with the Army National Guard. I'm on active duties orders with them. I have been for a few years. Lindsay and I have reasons to want to move, and so we visit Utah a couple times. That was her first time out to Utah. I'd already been there a couple times, and we love it. Like, we go back home and that's all we can talk about is Utah, because it's beautiful, it's clean, it's much cleaner than Ohio has 7 million more people than Utah, and it's smaller. And we got some elbow room visiting, and the last time we visit Utah, we said, why don't we just move out here? We were already wanting to move. We kind of felt like Utah was a good fit for what we had going on, and it was easy for me to come out here because of my military job. I applied for another job and got it. And so we've been here for a year and a half, just about a year and a half, and we're in, I don't like to call it a movement. People have different names for this. I just can call it the restoration. It's just the continuing of the restoration. Things are happening, and we've made some awesome friends. One of the things for me moving out here was I wanted to fellowship in person with people. And then COVID happened, and it didn't quite work out like I thought it would, and all the conferences are outside of Utah now, and so I'm closer, but it's still you gotta drive to do some stuff. And
Are you in a fellowship where you live now?
We've bounced around to different fellowships. That's one of the nice things about being here, is you can kind of see what works for you, because there are fellowships that have different flavors. What works for Doctrine of Christ is our thing. We talk about the latest and greatest, what's going on. But people have we've been to fellowships that don't have kids, and we have 3 rowdy kids, so that didn't work out. Different stuff like that. I've since learned, I think by my wife and my friends' wives' example, it's much better to focus on your family, of course, and then a small group of people. Because I came out here like, I want to know you, like, let's all meet, be best friends, and that you need to invest in people in a meaningful way. I can put my energy to getting to know you, and we reciprocate, and you know me, and now because we know each other, I have a reason to pray for you in behalf of you with full purpose of heart. And I can't do that if I am only acquaintances with everybody. So yes, we have a fellowship, but they're our friends. We've made amazing friends. Different personalities in the movement, but I know some Christ-like, like-minded people who push me in the restoration. We have deep, meaningful conversations, practical, and I'm happy where I'm at.
So are you finding now the satisfaction that you were missing when you were back in Ohio and began to drift from the LDS church?
Yes, but there are new challenges with that. Always when you get your cup filled with what you want, what's next? I have many more questions answered now than ever. I have friends that I associate with that we talk about the stuff I want to talk about. Great. As it turns out, I'm still a wretched man, and I still have a heart that needs a lot of work. And that is a challenge that I've accepted, and I've also accepted that could take longer than I imagined. It's good, though. It's good for me to focus, refine my heart and my character, because before I felt good about being the guy that people came to, had the answers, could teach. Cool. But am I the kind of guy that when the Lord returns with the saints, that we have a connection? We share the same heart, and we share the same values, and I would abide his coming. When I first thought about that, I had another oh crap moment. But now, because I have a labor to undertake and it's worthwhile, I trust the Lord more now than ever. I am honest with myself and my deficiencies more now than ever. And I'm patient with my growth and relationship with God more now than ever. Because I used to think I've done the ordinances, I've done the temple, I'm doing my callings, and I didn't feel like I was maybe celestial worthy, but I didn't have a reason to think I wasn't, if things would have, how things shake out in the end. So if anything, this movement, it makes you have to square up with yourself. You're your own judge. You are actually accountable for your words, thoughts, and deeds. And there are people watching. And I know that. So I want to work on that. And I'm happy to have a small circle and love my wife and my kids. And, Gordon B. Hinckley said it best. He said, "Be better than you were yesterday." And that's where I'm at.
My son has remarked to me and my wife about we've made more change in the last 2 years than the entire time that he knew us. And I think before, because we could check off a bunch of things we had done and certain levels of worthiness of being able to go to the temple and keeping certain commandments, we felt, and serving, we felt, okay, we're on the path, we just have to keep on this direction. But the responsibility for personal development wasn't always there. And sometimes I felt that lack. But now, my wife has remarked, and I feel the same, that the metric is very different. The metric is not those external things. Mm-hmm. The metric is, am I connected? Do I have a relationship? Can I feel the Spirit? Has the Spirit taught me? When's the last time the Spirit told me it?
And what does that mean, to feel the Spirit?
And it's not just, okay, I know something. It's not a fact or information, or I can quote certain scriptures. But it's really, have I internalized those things that I know are a little problematic for me? So am I acting differently with people? Am I still getting upset and losing my temper? Am I at peace? Mm-hmm. Am I getting inspiration and revelation? And what am I doing serving?
Yeah.
Those things are some of the things that are driving me anyway.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting. I don't know, are you doing anything that you view as service? I mean, you have a family of children. That's a big obligation all by itself.
Yeah.
But
Going back to the small circle thing, I have a bubble. And that bubble includes my neighbors, literally,
people next door.
people next door. My bubble includes the people I work with directly. I'm in the military. We are designed and supposed to be a lethal force. Maybe not the Air Force, but the Army anyway. So sometimes my morals and ethics clash with that. But I still know what I'm a part of, so how can I meaningfully, in a meaningful way, help people to be better in an environment like that? I have family back home that know where I stand with my faith, and that's a labor. I'm the only one in my family. And I'm able to talk with family on commonalities. We can talk about Christ, the light of Christ, the heart of the Christian faith, and we can grow together that way. And so my zealotry has calmed down. And I want to know how to connect with people. That's a labor in and of itself, where you're not connecting with people, love unfeigned, in that way. Like, really, like, my time here is short. What good can I do, even if it's a little bit? So the opportunities abound. It just looks different now. I don't equate helping some guy on the street any differently than I do Mom, well, I wouldn't say it this way, but just connecting with my mom differently instead of being like, oh yeah, here's why you're wrong. Because I learned the hard way that that really turns people off.
He's not going to receive it well.
I did it when I was in the Christian community. I even did it when I was learning all these things about Mormonism to my ward members. Looking back, you just did an interview on Jeff, and he says what he would have done things differently. That's one thing I would have done differently. So,
Good observation.
Yeah. My kids, my oldest is 6. I know people that I would consider stalwarts in what they believe. They are the ones that I say, you're here for this. You're born for this stuff. They have kids that don't believe or are atheists. My hope for my family is if they get into this, inevitably they will have to read the scriptures. They'll have to labor that. That's on them. I just don't want them to labor fully or as much through the false traditions that I did. If I can give them a smaller plate of that to go through, and then they can focus more on the scriptures, great. I'm happy.
Great.
Happy.
Is there anything else you want your kids to know from this interview? Because this interview could be around for 30 years.
I love them. I love you. I'm trying, because the varnish is off, I know where I stand with God. I know what labor I have to do as a man, a husband, and a father. I'm trying. I'm trying to be better than I was yesterday.
If you would like your Remnant story recorded, please contact me at pmjackson13@gmail.com. I can record your Remnant story, and if you wish, I can post it for the benefit of others. Thank you.